Hello, Kevin Polk here, and I've been asked to do an introduction to the Matrix, of which there's probably several around on the internet, but I thought I'd shoot another one. The Matrix is described many ways, the act matrix, but probably it's the best thought of or looked at as a useful point of view or a way for humans, us to look at our lives. And it literally is a point of view. It's a way of looking at things. And to look at something from a point of view, you need to look at through a lens or a diagram. And in this case, it's a diagram. And the diagram is before you in this video. Senses at the top, mind at the bottom, toward over here to the right and away over to the left, and then you'll see the noticing in the middle. The best way to do the matrix is to go ahead and walk yourself through it. So you take up a pen. It's usually what I use. Piece of paper, anything will do, that you can experience physically through your four or five senses. With a pen, we usually see the pen. And right now you might have the pen in your hand and you'd see the pen, and you could tap, tap, tap. Here, I'll tap. Maybe you can hear that. With the pen, you can, of course, feel it as you roll it around in your fingers. You can smell the pen. I'm smelling mine. And I usually leave off taste because that wouldn't be sanitary. So that's the pen, looking at the information coming into you through the five channels that are known as the five senses. And so then those, of course, end up down here in the mind. And what you can now do is set the pen aside or whatever you had and close your eyes if you want. And now you do that same experiencing in your mind. So it's mind experiencing. So you see the pen in your mind, and you hear it in your mind, and you touch it in your mind, and you smell it in your mind. And now that it's in your mind, of course, you can taste it all that you want. So just have a blast tasting the pen. And so that's that. And now you go in the middle here, and you notice the difference between your five senses experiencing of the pen versus your mental mind experiencing of the pen. So that's one. And so then to continue with this point of view, we do it again, but this time we go over here to this side, and we think about moving towards someone who is important to us. So think of a friend or a loved one and walking toward that person, how it feels to recall moving toward that person. Give that a moment or so. There you go. Then you go over here and to the away side, and this time you think about moving away from some unwanted feeling inside of you, and that goes down here like fear. So imagine fear showing up in your life, and you did a behavior, an action to move away from the fear. And so just recall that for a moment. And now that you've done that, you can go back here to the middle and notice the difference between how it feels to recall moving toward somebody who was important to you versus moving away from some unwanted feeling like fear. So you notice that difference just for a moment. And there you go. You've got the basic point of view of noticing the difference between your five senses and mental experiencing, and noticing the difference between how it feels to move toward and how it feels to move away from yucky stuff inside of you. And so that's the basic matrix. You can go ahead and fill it out a little bit more, really bring it into the level of somebody's life or your life by answering the question, who is important? And that the answer to that question goes down here in the lower right quadrant. So who is important to you? So if this is being done in a classroom right now, you can pause this and literally go around the room and say, well, who is important to me? And I'm going to go ahead and talk, but you could have paused the video and talked about who is important. I would say the things that oftentimes show up are friends and family, spouse, husband, girlfriend, boyfriend, neighbors, fellow students. That kind of stuff shows up down here in the who is important to you. Later on, you can talk about what is important to you. But initially, we talk about who is important. And so that fills out that part of somebody's life, and then of their inner life, that is thinking about who is important to them. And then we come over here and we talk about the stuff that can show up like fear and get in the way of moving toward who's important to you. I leave fear here as an example because most of us have had the experience, let's say if we're a teenager or above in our living, have had the experience of wanting or thinking about asking someone out, but as soon as we thought about asking somebody out on a date, then fear of rejection showed up. So there's the fear of rejection showed up. And if you go with that fear of rejection, that is, you avoid asking somebody to go out, well, that would look like that, and you indeed would not ask the person out. So that's what we're talking about with that, the kind of stuff that can show up inside of you, like fear, and get in the way of moving toward who's important to you. So you can pause the tape once again and have a discussion, a class discussion or something about stuff other than fear, or in addition to fear, that can show up. You may have paused it, may not have, that's fine. The other things that often show up over here are anger, frustration, I'll just abbreviate it, frustration, sadness and depression oftentimes show up, and the list goes on. Inside of a large group meeting, we can actually fill that up very robustly. So I'm going to take a little break here. I forgot to erase my name and stuff there. Thanks for bearing with me. And switch back over to my pen. And so now we've discussed who's important and what kind of stuff can show up and get in the way. And this is all inside of it. So when we go up here, these are observable behaviors. That means someone else or a camera. Sometimes people draw a camera up here, but I'm not very good at drawing. I'll try and draw one. There's a lousy camera with a lens. Maybe it's on a tripod, right? There you go. And that camera can look and see what you're doing. And so what might somebody do to move away from fear? So we start talking about that stuff. So I'll give you an example. Well, somebody, maybe it's a dog or a cat or something. Cat, yeah. But maybe it was a lion, tiger, or bear, or whatever coming at. And the big category is avoid. But we usually go for looking at an actual behavior like run. You could see somebody run. Or they might hide. If we were watching with the camera, we could see them go and find a hiding place. So that kind of thing. And then you can discuss what kind of stuff people do to move away from anger. I'll go ahead and give you one. They oftentimes yell to move away from anger. That shows up a lot. Frustration, sadness, boom, boom. These are all observable behaviors that people might do to lessen this stuff. Literally lessen this stuff. And then finally, so those all get written up here in the upper left. And then finally we have the upper right over here, and this is where we write down behaviors that we can do to move toward who's important to us. I'll tell you right now, I already brought up walking, so you can walk toward somebody who's important to you. You can talk to them. And once again, you can pause the tape and you can discuss all kinds of behaviors that you might do that you would really know that would be a committed action in act lingo toward who is important to you. So there you go. And so with that, we've drawn a handy picture, a handy diagram of somebody's life, your life, my life, whoever, and we say, okay, here I've mapped out, written down who's important to me. I've mapped out, written down the kind of stuff that shows up and can get in the way of moving toward. As I said, we can bring in stuff like education and work and those kind of things. And of course, this stuff can show up and get in the way of that stuff as well. And that's just showing up. That's just the inside struggles. But literally, that can be translated into behaviors. And when the behaviors are to literally lessen or get rid of this stuff, throw away behaviors. And when they're to move toward who and what's important to us are these behaviors. And now we can see all this. And over time, we can notice this. We can notice this. And we can notice those showing up, and we can notice ourselves doing away behaviors, and we can notice ourselves doing these toward behaviors. And all of that noticing backs us up off of all of this process, and we can see ourselves in life. And that opens up the opportunity for more choices. And that's essentially what you're going for here. A lot of life is automatic behaviors, and we can't do anything about that. They're just automatic. But we can certainly at times choose. We can choose whether to turn right or left and going at a street corner, right? You can choose to go shopping or choose to go to a sporting event. There's lots of choices that one can make. You can even choose what you're going to say. So this is all about increasing those opportunities for choices, especially in the light that a lot of times all of us, me included, get into the habit of automatically moving away from this yucky stuff that shows up because why? It feels yucky. It doesn't feel good, and it'll show up and boom, we'll do an away behavior. And if we get backed up off of that enough through this noticing process, well, we can say, well, I really got the urge to do this away behavior, but I'm going to go ahead and have that and move toward who's important to me. And that sentence that I just said is acceptance and commitment. I'll have this or accept this, and put the and in the middle, and I will commit to doing this toward behavior. That's acceptance and commitment. That line is the ACT line. So that's the matrix, the ACT matrix and how you look at it. I'm going to go a little bit further just because some people are interested in this. They know that the philosophy, there's actually a philosophy of science behind ACT called functional contextualism. And so now you can see all that. You can always come back to this. I'm going to erase almost everything to show you how functional contextualism fits with all this stuff. There we go. And hopefully the very last thing I put on there was noticing and that circle, and we got rid of it. Great. This, when I say those two complicated sounding words, functional contextualism, you already know what that is. That is the cool thing. Because of the last 5 minutes you've spent with me on this video, you know what that is. And you're saying, what's he mean by that? This line represents functional. So you can just look at it that way. And what's that mean? It's the function, the functional, but it's a function of a behavior. Is the function of the behavior to move me toward who or what's important to me, or is the function of the behavior to move me away from yucky stuff down here? If you've studied a little psychology, you know that when you move away from something that feels yucky and it works, the reinforcer out on the end of it is called negative reinforcement. That is, negative stands for taking away of something that feels bad. Negative reinforcement. And so we'll say that. Oh, I can't. You get it. It's negative reinforcement. And over here, this is getting something. That's positive. You get something positive. And when you get that positive, of course, it's a reinforcement. I'll just put free, like that. So there you go. So that's the function of the behavior. And from this point of view, this functional contextual point of view, that behavior occurs in a context that actually, and from an act point of view, the behavior, of course, occurs out in the world of the five senses, but it also occurs in your mind. And just think for a moment, you're always somewhere. You can look around you right now and see where you are. That's your five senses experiencing, and there's people around you and stuff. But maybe you've heard this term. I got up on the wrong side of the bed this morning. You may have heard that term. Well, that's an internal context. That's the wrong side of the bed context. And so those two contexts come together to form the context that you're behaving within at any moment. And that's what this line represents, is that external to internal, and of course it mixes up here in the middle, context, but this is the contextual, there we go, contextual line. So functional contextualism. There we go. So I told you already knew it. You just hadn't seen it before. So now when we start saying, gee, is this behavior to move me toward who's important to me? We're looking at things from, and I look at the context that it was within, that behavior was within. I'm doing a functional contextual view. If I say, gee, was this a behavior to move me away from something uncomfortable in this context? Yes. And you say, well, why is that important? Well, we know that the function of a behavior changes according to the context. So I might do a running behavior to run toward my health for me, and so I might run for my health, or there may be fear of a bear, fear of bear. And so I might run to save myself. That is, reduce this fear, run. And so that's where we get this thing of, it depends. The function of a behavior can depend on the context that it's within. And we can change this internal context and we can change this external context. But what you do with the matrix here is, of course, I have, in the last few minutes, changed your external context for sure. Why? Because you've been listening to me present the matrix to you. So that came in through these senses, especially sight and sound, came in that way. And so you get the idea. Functional contextualism. So why is that important? Well, it says it's also known as the workability point of view. Workability point of view. And workability, that's not spelled right, but you get that, that's workability. Workability point of view, and that just shows that the workability of a behavior depends on the context it's in. Mechanism basically says it works all the time across contexts. That's mechanism. So a mechanistic point of view doesn't look at it in that nuanced, it depends. Two words I'm saying is it depends. Instead, in mechanism, it is. We can't look at that nuanced look at things from a mechanistic point of view. Why is that important? Okay, because oftentimes we have anxiety, and we say anxiety equals bad, and we need to do something to get rid of anxiety, fix anxiety, and that's that mechanistic view. But all we have to do is stand back for a moment and say, well, not all anxiety is bad. Little anxiety helps get me geared up and ready to do something. So it's not bad. I really don't need to fix that anxiety. Oh, well, that's nuanced. And it gets difficult to do from the mechanistic point of view. So instead, we just look at it from the functional contextual point of view and say, well, a way moves, it depends. Maybe that works. And so there you go. That's functional contextualism. RFT simply says this. A huge part of relational frame theory, RFT, which is the theory of language and cognition that ACT is based upon, simply says that we humans are really good at transforming five senses experiencing onto words. A word that's oftentimes used is lemons. So before you were born, you didn't know the word lemons, that sound of lemons. But as you experienced lemons and that they were sour and they were yellow and they were citrus and da-da-da-da-da-da-da, you eventually got a mental representation of lemon. And so you're a little bit fused with the word lemon. But if you get too fused with the word lemon, let's say you had a bad lemon experience, and now you will do anything in your power to avoid lemons. No lemons. I won't have lemons. I know I'm being silly, but this is what it's about. You can get overly fused with a word, with something mental, and you'll tend to get locked in a set of behaviors, and they tend to most often be away behaviors. Sometimes they're toward. And what that simply means is that instead of running around your life so that you're sort of here in the middle and noticing your five senses and noticing your mental and being flexible, this is also known as the psychological flexibility point of view, instead your point of view has dropped down here and you're operating largely too much from the mental side of things and not taking in enough information about the effect of your behaviors. And so if it's down here and you're doing this lemon avoiding behavior, you'll tend to not notice how limiting that is on your life. And that's basically the problem that people get. They get too much in their heads, and this is the old in your head thing you'll hear people say. And it's the basis for the title of Steve Hayes' 1985 book, Get Out of Your Mind and Into Your Life. And what that refers to is moving this up to the middle so that you're aware of everything instead of sort of being blocked in your mind. The human condition is we all tend to get a little bit too much in our heads because language is so darn good at transforming our experience into our heads. And so that's the idea of mindfulness and all the stuff that you hear about. It's to get you so you're not so locked up in your head and you're noticing more completely. So there you go. Little tour through the ACT matrix, functional contextualism, and a little bit of RFT. Hope you enjoyed it, and that's it for now. Bye-bye.